Brenda is one of the most passionate and committed professionals in this community, and we are so fortunate to have her working in Fragile X. I have been working with her on the board of directors now for about 3 years, and she continues to astonish me every day with the wealth of knowledge and the depth of her experiences, and we are very, very lucky. So please welcome Brenda Finucane.
Good morning, everyone. I was half expecting, because it's Saturday morning, that people were just going to bag the session. I think I might have done that on Saturday morning. So thank you all for being here. I do want to make an update, since when I gave that bio to Linda or Jane many months ago, it's changed a little bit. I just want to acknowledge Carolyn Tomberlin as actually the chair of the Research Facilitation Committee these days. So, and just a plug for a special session that's coming up at 10, talking about the biobank project, which Carolyn will be leading. All righty, well, this talk has given me a fair amount of angst. I could speak in front of Yankee Stadium. I never have anxiety about speaking, and particularly when it's related to facts and genetics and things that I know really, really well. But this particular talk came out of some conversations that I had with Jane Dixon-Weber and Linda Sorensen, and also Brian Silver, and some other folks, just talking about some of the positive aspects that people don't necessarily think about with relation to Fragile X associated disorders, Fragile X syndrome in particular, and really how the diagnosis of someone with one of these disorders has far-reaching ripple effects well into the professional community and even outside of those who have direct contact. So that is the topic of my talk today. I am going to focus on Fragile X syndrome, but I think certainly the same could be said of the other Fragile X disorders as well, and ripple effects. So, when you think about ripples, and you think in terms of water rippling from one central place, these ripples will emanate from one site. And so in terms of Fragile X syndrome, we can think of the diagnosis of Fragile X as being that big splash. You're moving along in your life, and all of a sudden, this diagnosis comes along, and it makes everybody pause, and there are a variety of reactions to this. I want to put this into context, though. There are many big splashes in the lives of every human being. I don't personally have children with Fragile X syndrome, but everybody has splashes along their life journey. These might be medical diagnoses like cancer. It could be times when a person loses a job. It could be the unexpected birth of a child. Many things like that. But really, at that moment, when some major life event occurs, there is a big splash. And in terms of Fragile X, the epicenter, if you will, of this splash is really the diagnosis. And so for the Fragile X syndrome, the diagnosis often comes at a very young age, particularly these days when a lot of genetic testing gets done for lots of kids who have developmental delay. And most often, because children with developmental delay are kind of moving in the right direction, they're getting speech therapy, et cetera, you're seeing some gains and they're still very young. Most often, parents are not expecting that they're going to hear news about something like Fragile X. They're kind of coming, and I happen to be associate director of an Autism and Developmental Medicine Institute, where we see lots of kids coming in with global developmental delay, and unfortunately, we have to tell them that it's not something the child is going to outgrow in most cases, and so that's a bit of an adjustment. And then when we make a genetic diagnosis, whether it's Fragile X syndrome or some other diagnosis, very often there's a permanency to that really is a big splash and requires a big reset. So I'm going to reference this little guy in my talk today. He's no longer a little guy, he's an adult, but I've known him for many, many years. His name is Jesse. And when that big splash happens of the Fragile X diagnosis and the other diagnoses that kind of go along with that, whether it's developmental delay or later, maybe intellectual disability, autism, the other sort of diagnoses that describe the symptoms that go along with Fragile X syndrome, that splash lasts for a long time in that the focus of the family is very much turned inward on that child. What's this child's life going to be like? What's their schooling going to be like? What's the best therapy? What can we do to help this child? So there's a very myopic focus, naturally, on the child who gets the diagnosis. But after a little while, things sort of settle down, and you start to see the first ripple in the family, and the ripples are more around, what is this diagnosis in our family? How does this change the relationship between my husband and me, for example? Or what is the impact on our other children, the siblings of the person? So you've got this wider ripple going on. And in terms of parents, what I've heard over many, many years, again and again, is how the diagnosis of Fragile X, or whatever the condition is, really manages to change people's perspective. So you have parents maybe who were both, professionals. They decided to have their child and were fully planning on going back to work and, kind of high-powered careers, and all of a sudden they have a child with special needs and they reset. It doesn't mean they can't pursue their careers. It doesn't mean they can't still pursue their interests. But what I hear again and again is that they have a different focus. They kind of recognize what's really important in life. Is it really that important that I have the best suit and I get this promotion, et cetera? And a lot of times, just having that child with special needs, whether it's Fragile X or Down syndrome or whatever the condition might be, really kind of resets that perspective. The other thing that happens to many, many parents is, they, and particularly true of people coming to this conference, they kind of realize, all right, well, I can't sit around crying all day. I've got to get on my stick here and got to figure out what's going on, what is this diagnosis, and I need to advocate for my child or my adult, et cetera. And so there's an empowerment that goes along with that. And so you see these parents, and they come to IEP meetings, and you don't want to mess around with these people. I mean, we have a superhero theme going here, and really, when you think of the parents and all they've learned and how they try to advocate, I think you see that. And that may not be something that prior to the birth of this child that they did. It's kind of this new skill set that they have. I had one mom who told me, after an IEP meeting where she was talking and she knew all the school jargon and she knew exactly, what the goals would be and where they were going for the next year. And afterwards she was like, sometimes I just amaze myself. I never studied this stuff. All of a sudden I have this new skill set, all these things that I've learned. What I love to see, and I think we see it very clearly on the board of directors in particular, are parents who have been around the block for a while. They have teens and adults with Fragile X syndrome. They've sort of settled into, their lives and are able to appreciate the joys, the humor, et cetera, not to diminish the challenges. They're always there, but can really see it. And now they want to pay it forward. In other words, they want to help families who are just starting their journey with Fragile X. And that is pretty cool. And we see that again and again. And I think service on the board of directors, service on the committee, service with all of you here in Cincinnati who have helped to put this conference together is that type of energy. So rather than, again, just this focus on the child, you've moved to your family, you've now moved to the broader community. Here's Jesse, as he is today. He's quite a bit older than the previous picture I showed you, and his fabulous mother, Janice, who happens to work with us in our center. And she pays it forward every day because she interacts with lots of families as a phlebotomist, and she does some research consenting for us at our center. And she's just a wealth of knowledge. Having an adult son now with Fragile X syndrome, she knows all about services, she knows a lot about schooling, and she can just give some sage advice and perspective to other families. So when that happens, I think it's a beautiful thing. And if you had asked Janice when Jessie was first diagnosed at 18 months of age, did she ever imagine that she would be in a point where she would be kind of the mentor and comforting all these other families and giving them advice? She would never have imagined it. But she got there, and families get there, and that's part of really a major ripple effect, because imagine how helpful that is to families who are just starting their own journey. Siblings of individuals with Fragile X often, they have challenges because, of course, a lot of the focus initially is on the child with Fragile X syndrome, and so sometimes the siblings have their own challenges. And so parents worry about that. Parents worry, oh my gosh, I have to give so much energy to all these meetings, et cetera, and the needs of my child with Fragile X syndrome. What about the siblings? Are they going to be all right? I can't tell you for any individual family that everything's going to be all right, but I can tell you what the research shows. The research shows that by and large, siblings of individuals with developmental disabilities tend as a group to be more drawn to human services professions, to be more empathic, to tend to be more accepting of people's disabilities, to have perspective. So those are all real positive things that we know happen to siblings. And it's challenging, but there are plenty of siblings out there who don't have a experience with developmental disabilities, but have other types of challenges. But it's good to know that overall, the increasing body of research is showing this is not a permanent negative effect on a sibling, quite the opposite. I can think of siblings in this community. I'll just give a shout out to Haley Silver as one example of a sibling who's, interested in special education, has gone on, and we have a sibling group here working on advocating for their brothers and sisters, but also for themselves. And so we think of many of siblings who have gone into nursing, who've gone into special education. And if you look at the opposite and look at special educators, I'm no longer surprised out there when I find so many special educators, behavior analysts, psychologists, and others who will tell me, oh yeah, I have a brother who has Down syndrome, or oh yeah, I grew up with a sister who has autism. So there's something about that we should look in a positive way. This isn't a world you asked for, but it's a world you've entered, and there are some very positive outcomes there. Another ripple has to do with the community at large. Outside of your family, and outside of the people who are directly touched by Fragile X. And that includes other families who may not be related to you, but also have a child with Fragile X syndrome or another child with some sort of special developmental needs. And sometimes those ripples intersect with each other. They'll intersect at school. They are definitely intersecting all over the place here in the Hyatt. I'm surprised there isn't a big humming sound coming from the Hyatt right now in Cincinnati. But it's that shared experience and that comfort level to be able to sit down to somebody you haven't even met before at this conference, and you don't have to explain why your child is flapping or running around, et cetera. They kind of totally get it and might even say, I remember my child when at that age was doing the same thing. This is my colleague Barbara Hoskiv. I'm going to embarrass her. It was about 1 million years ago, just more or less 1 million years ago. But she was a special educator for many, many years before becoming a behavior analyst. And I want to talk a bit about special educators and therapists and people who have direct involvement, one-on-one, with kids with special developmental needs all day long. The ripple there is that when they meet their first child with Fragile X syndrome, and they start to learn about what this condition is, very often they get hooked and they want to learn more. And then they recognize the next child who comes to their classroom with Fragile X syndrome, and they start to make those connections. Barbara, in particular, since we were at the same human services agency and I was working as the genetic counselor there, she would feed me a regular list of names of kids. Oh, I think this kid has Fragile X, and I think this kid has Fragile X. And before you knew it, we had a very large population of people diagnosed with Fragile X syndrome, not because we were putting something in the water in Pennsylvania, but because they were there all the time, but there was no awareness. And she also taught some of the other teachers and therapists about this as well. This is Jesse again, just this year. He happened to get an award from the ARC for self-advocacy. And the day he was supposed to get this award, his mom, Janice, was going to tell him that they were going to get the award because she didn't want to tell him too soon because he'd immediately start saying no and being really anxious about it and lose sleep. And so she was, this is her way of sort of something that's going to be out of his routine. She would wait till that day and just sort of casually said, well, we're going to go over here. She also didn't tell him he was going to get an award because he would immediately have said no because the focus would have been on him, etc. So what she told him was, we're going to go see other people get awards. Little did he know he was actually going to get an award himself. And one of the stories that Janice always tells about Jesse, and I've heard it again and again from many families, is this immediate no reaction that so many of our folks with Fragile X just have when anything is changing or anything good is happening. Even if it's something good, like the immediate reaction might be no. And if you think about it, if you're really anxious, you can learn that if I say no right away, I can get out of this thing. I don't know what it is, but I'm anxious about it, so I'm going to say no. So she always gives that the example, and she tells this to other families that they went to a restaurant in recent years, and the waitress comes over and says to Jesse, is taking their orders, and Jesse really likes salad, but the waitress said to him, would you like salad? He immediately said no. No with ranch dressing, is what he said. So this was his day when he was getting his award, so he showed up. And of course, once he got there, he was fine. But the most beautiful thing was that people were there that even the family didn't know were coming, just to see Jesse get his award. This ripple extended to people from his old high school, to people from his work programs, to people who just knew him from the community and they wanted to be there and celebrate with him. This is also a picture from about 1 million years ago, but this man, Bill, who's now passed away, was the first person I knew and diagnosed with Fragile X syndrome many years ago. And again, there's something about knowing the families, learning about this condition, that for some of us professionally just really hooks us in, even more so than any other conditions that we have dealt with. And so I've been involved for many, many years with Fragile X, but looking around the conference here, these are all colleagues who've been coming to these meetings with me for a gazillion years as well. So one of the added benefits is actually coming and just seeing everybody again. Why is that? It's because that ripple effect for Fragile X actually has an impact in shaping people outside the family, shaping the career choices we make, shaping our career interests in what we go after. That's a really big thing because every single one of us who is devoted and dedicated to your children and to Fragile X is also doing things where we're diagnosing new families, where we're doing research to try to help things in the future. We're really trying to advocate on behalf of the community. So just imagine, from one central family to this wide-ranging ripple effect. Something I find very amusing is that the National Fragile X Foundation, in the eyes of many, many other hundreds of syndrome groups, has become the one to beat. There is a tremendous amount of envy out there about the National and about how the NFXF has really managed to do so many different things. So from a personal standpoint, I've been actively involved in these 3 organizations. There are hundreds of others. And I will fully admit, I do cheat on Fragile X syndrome from time to time because I'm a genetic counselor, but I always come back because Fragile X is in my heart. These other conditions are also in my heart, but there's something about Fragile X. But what is it that makes other groups very envious and wishing they could be like the National Fragile X Foundation? Well, we have some longevity here. We have a large group. We also have a very dedicated group of professionals that have been with the foundation for a long time, which really gives us some power there as a professional family community. We also have new innovations, like the Biobank Project, like our interest in helping people at an individual family level, and also at a community level, at a research level, et cetera. So these other groups very often are wishing that they could get to that point, that they're like the National Fragile X Foundation. I often hear from families as well, frustrated sometimes that nobody seems to know what Fragile X is. Well, when I'm sitting at the table on the board of directors for the 22Q Foundation, the families are saying, everybody knows Fragile X. Nobody knows 22Q. Now, the 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, for example, is at least 4 to 5 times more common than Fragile X syndrome. And so they're always saying that they don't have the awareness, but they're comparing it to Fragile X. So I guess it's all relative to our experiences. So where do we go with this now? And just to give you your sort of inspirational marching orders going forward, that each of you got to this place because of that big splash, and you're here. And you're all in various stages of your ripples, but try to think about all the ripples now from your family and how far they've gone out and how far they have yet to go and what your impacts might be in the future. Because eventually these various ripples all start to converge, and they converge even outside of Fragile X. So there's a whole lot going on right now in the world of genetics. For the longest time, Fragile X was a well-known syndrome among a relatively small number of well-defined syndromes. But now, with the types of technological advances we have in genetics, there are literally thousands of causes of neurodevelopmental disorders. And be very thankful, because all the new ones have number names. We don't have a number name. I can't tell you how many of these other groups are like, why do we have to have a number name? We wish we were Fragile X. But the point is, all those other ones are starting to grow and converge as well. And so not only should we be looking at our Fragile X community, but more and more our colleagues in research and elsewhere are looking across Fragile X to other conditions that also cause similar symptoms. And that's not blasphemy. That's not heresy, that we're just like moving and actually doing some collaborating with the 22q11.2 group, for example. It's because we are individually rare disorders, but collectively we're actually quite common. And so there are some shared pathways, as you've heard about this at this conference, that we're starting to explore to say, well, maybe syndrome A, B, C, and D all actually converge like roads into the same shared highway. And if we can figure out things about that highway, it's going to benefit us all. So that's the next frontier here, and that's the next big ripple. Well, thank you very much. It's been a long week, but like an amazing week, and it's great to see you all here. And I hope you enjoy the remainder of the conference. Take care.